I'm not going to give much of an introduction. This is, all know LJ, and we're going to be on the third of a Beguine Mystics tonight. And the only thing I'll say is people have to volunteer to read. If you don't volunteer to read, you get kicked out.
Oh
Okay.
no.
Not really.
You just
Who's
have to
for
listen to
sure?
the rest of us.
Just have to listen to the rest of us. Take it away, LJ.
And maybe we'll mute ourselves now that we're ready to go.
Yeah, that's a
Go
good
for it.
idea.
All right. Here we go. All right. It's going to be a deep one tonight. So just get ready. So we did the three Beguines. We're doing the three Beguines, excuse me. The three main Beguines, who are, this woman's community out of the Middle Ages, Matilda Magdeburg, we did last week, and the first week we did Hadvig of Antwerp. The latest in the series, the one who was born later, and arguably the most radical, and it was, of course, the French woman. If you're French, you might know. Marguerite Porete. So I invite you, before we begin, just for a few moments to enter some contemplative silence. Let go of all your thinking and just be with God for a moment. Take a big, deep breath. And listen to Marguerite. Lover, you have grasped me in your love to give me your great treasure. That is the gift of your own self, which is divine goodness. Heart cannot express this, but willing, pure nothingness purifies the heart, which makes me climb so high by union and concordance, which I ought never to reveal. Amen. All right, so you get a little taste right away of Marguerite. Her wording can be unusual and difficult, as you might already get a little sense there in this prayer. Who was this lady, Marguerite Porete? There she is. She was a Beguine, a lay woman living a contemplative life in the world with other lay women. She was probably a teacher of these other Beguine women. And she wrote this very influential mystical treatise, The Mirror of Simple Souls. But that's just generally how it's known. Here's the full title: The Mirror of Simple Souls Who Are Annihilated and Remain Only in Will and Desire of Love. So it's a mouthful. So we just call it The Mirror of Simple Souls. Her teaching, challenging and uncomfortable to the male hierarchy, became suspect and was eventually denounced as heretical. So on June 1st, 1310, the Bishop of Paris ordered her burning at the stake as punishment for heresy. Today, though, we must realize that the inquisitors who denounced her took supposedly heretical statements out of context and without understanding what she meant. She was burned at the stake because she sort of dared to challenge the church. And if you just do a little historical research, you'll find that the process of the Inquisition was anything but fair to the accused. They were sort of looking for heresy, and once they found any pretext, they put you to the stake. And honestly, she had a panel of distinguished theologians examine her book, and they judged it to be orthodox. So it wasn't really about her teaching, it was about her. This is as much as we know about Marguerite outside of her book. We know next to nothing about her. But there's the book, The Mirror of Simple Souls, and it brings together apophatic discourse and the language of courtly love. Apophatic discourse is the kind of speech you get, the kind of language and writing you get in someone like Meister Eckhart, The Cloud of Unknowing, Thomas Merton. It's using negative language to express the transcendence of God how God is beyond language and therefore beyond thinking and beyond even existence itself. So her book radically redefines selfless love and God as love. She seeks annihilation of reason and will, a state of total selflessness that occurs not through our efforts, but when one is taken up and ravished by the divine lover. For her, falling in love with God is conceived of as falling from love into nothingness, reflecting the gospel theme of the loss of self and love. So the Mirror is 140 short chapters, and it consists of a dialogue between a group of personified characters, kind of like we had last week with Mechthild. And some of her characters are Love, Lady Love, Reason, the Annihilated Soul, also, weird name, Far Near. That's the divine lover of the annihilated soul, and Far Near is the only male character in the entire book. Far Near echoes the coming and going of divine love and is identified with the Trinity. The central event of her book is the death of Reason, who is mortally wounded by love. So what's behind this book? What's her mystical experience? So again, she is a radical mystic, and it's all found in this radicality. It's all found in the Mirror of Simple Souls. Her treatise, again, is in the form of a dialogue between love and the soul. And the replies are the response of love is an increasing clarification, simplification. It's the soul's annihilation. So the whole book is, you could say, like putting the soul through a process of clarification, right? Just cleaning the soul up, reducing the soul to its purest form, and then annihilating it entirely. Through love, the soul wills nothing and knows nothing. Such a soul has become nothing. Her theme of the annihilated soul who wills and knows nothing highlights a deep ontological negation that opens out into unity with the divine nothing. That's the essence of apophatic contemplation. That's really the central practice, the only practice she teaches, which is apophatic contemplation is just a way of saying silent meditation. So the purpose of this book is to lead souls into nothing by willing, by knowing nothing, that is, into apophatic contemplation. She brings her great gifts as a writer to bear on this goal. Maria Lichtman, who's a great scholar, she asserts, Marguerite uses all the linguistic means at her disposal, particularly those of paradox and contradiction, to annihilate in language as in reality all understanding, will, love, and even the self itself. So what we're going to see here, and why the church gets so annoyed with this and kind of afraid of it, is the self is a structure. It's a structure of duality. It's a structure that uses thought and feeling to organize experience. And all of that, Porete is saying, let go of. If I'm letting go of the internal structure of my thinking, well, what's upholding the outer structure of society, right? So you can see where the hierarchy kind of went with this. So she describes God as God and Lady Love and Far Near. Those are her two words for God in the book. Again, far near means God is infinitely distant and unknown, and for that very reason, more here in the divine absence. But she does not define God as either. Her theology commits to an epistemological negation that recognizes the insufficiency of all divine names, meaning she recognizes that our thinking, our feelings, our names for God are just that, thinking, feeling, and names, and not God and God's self. So for Porete, God is still overflowing goodness, self-giving love, which, quote, tends by the nature of charity to give and overflow his total goodness. So even that, yes, God is love, but not what you and I mean by love. God is greater love than that. The whole journey of annihilation runs on love. So God is both love and nothingness, and the journey and the practice. God, the bountiful outpouring of a manifest love, belongs to an unmanifest nothingness, which can be reached only by knowing nothing, willing nothing, having no space for God. Love is annihilation. We've been talking in the Beguine mysticism of Hadvig and Mechthild. We've been seeing how love is many things. Love is desire, right? Love is transformation. Love is longing. Love is unity. But we've also seen in Hadvig and Mechthild a kind of opening for this idea: love is annihilation. Well, Porete runs with it. So this is a very Beguine idea. So let's talk about annihilation. When she was in the desert, love overmastered her and brought her to nothing. And so love then worked in her, for her, without her. And then she lived a divine life. She found God within herself without seeking him, for love overmastered her. So this is what annihilation is. It's not that you literally are blotted out of existence. It means that you lose the biggest barrier to love and to unity with God, the self. So nothingness or annihilation could also be termed no self. We go beyond the self. I mean, this is what's so funny. The inquisitors, in denying her book, and before she was burned at the stake, she was ordered to recant her teachings, and they took copies. They were also getting annoyed because this book was spreading like wildfire. So they tried to get as many copies as they could and burn the book. But they're also in that burning her book and burning her, that they're burning really one of the essential messages of the gospel, right? Lose your life, deny yourself. It's right in the middle, the very first gospel, at least in terms of when we think it was written, Mark. Right in the middle of Mark chapter 8, right? Jesus says he predicts his passion, his resurrection, and he turns to everybody and says, if you want to follow me, you have to deny yourself, take up your cross, lose your life, right? Annihilation is simply another way of saying what Jesus said, to lose your life. Lose who you think you are. Lose the idea of the self and the sense that I'm separate from God and from everything else, from creation, right? So you see how when I'm in the desert, what that means is when I'm in my interior space of willing, knowing, having nothing, then love flows through me. There's no barrier, right? Then there's no more me as I conceive of me, right? It's just God working through me. So there are three aspects to annihilation that we've already sort of alluded to. But first, she says that God is the nothingness that gives her, the soul, the all. God is the nothingness that gives the soul the all. So God is still love. God is still obviously real, but the nothingness that makes the soul everything. The soul meets the divine nothing in a deep encounter of willing nothing, knowing nothing, and having no place. So if you were in my, when did I do the Eckhart class? Years ago now. This is one of the key teachings of Meister Eckhart also. Willing nothing, knowing nothing, and having nothing. Some think that Eckhart may have gotten it from Porete. There's other evidence that says he may have gotten it from Bernard of Clairvaux. Maybe she got it from Bernard of Clairvaux. But the point is, this is her theme. Willing, knowing nothing, and having no place for God. Right? So willing, knowing, having, right? Those are the three aspects. Having, knowing, and willing are the core components of self. And the last vestige of self for Porete is the will. All must be, I'm sorry for these several typos here, all must be annihilated to be transparent to the divine love. So if you don't like the word annihilation, first of all, good. I'm glad you don't. It should be slightly upsetting or slightly perplexing. That's sort of the purpose of using that word. But that last phrase on this bullet point, is maybe another way to think of annihilation. It's about being transparent to divine love. I think of an image from St. John of the Cross. He says, the soul is like a window, and the window is often dirty with smudges, or the shades are drawn. Well, open the shades, clean the window, let the light pour in. The light is God's love. And the soul is like a window, but the window has to be transparent. Well, Porette's going one step further. Open the window so there's nothing at all, letting the light, blocking the light out, right? So you're at that point you're just sort of a portal, just an opening for divine love. But having, knowing, and willing, those are all essential aspects of the self. All of that goes. But she really focuses on willing. Although she outlines these three dimensions to the practice of nothingness, which we'll get into, she tends to focus on willing nothing. That for her is the core of what a self is. A self has self-determination, right? I can choose what I want to do. Near the end of the mirror, for instance, Porete exclaims, "Willing nothing has lordship." She has this focus because she thinks the will is the last vestige of the self. Therefore, she counsels annihilation regarding the will, or willing nothing. She even says, don't will to do the will of God, because that's still a me willing to do the will of God. It's more just let the will of God happen. Marguerite's mirror insists, and this is, I think this is all Maria Lichtman. Her mirror insists on the nothingness of God and of the soul brought to nothing in God. Oh, excuse me. Marguerite's theology and its emphasis on knowing nothing as the way to the unknowable God may be considered a classic instance of the apophatic program of Dionysius. Dionysius was a 6th century anonymous Syrian monk who wrote a very influential treatise called The Mystical Theology and kind of started all this kind of thinking about nothingness. Yet her mysticism might be said to assume the cognitive apophaticism of Dionysius and to concentrate more on a conative apophaticism aimed at willing nothing. Conative means it's a doing. She doesn't so much explore God as nothing. She'll say it here and there. She sort of assumes that you understand God is beyond all things. She instead focuses on the practice and the stages that the soul is led through to be annihilated. But willing nothing, let's focus on that for a moment. To will nothing means God wills for the soul who no longer has a will. It is as if the soul's will disappears in the divine will. That's it. God wants us to no longer have a will. The soul does not will to do God's will. Rather, quote, it is the will of God which wills it in her. So again, it's almost like you're just a space for the will of God to happen. Then it is the accomplishing of God's will. The will holds the soul back from being free. That's the problem here. She writes, the soul wills nothing, says love, since she is free. For one is not free who wills something by the will within him, whatever he might will. It's like a little koan right there. The soul wills nothing, says love, since she is free. One is not free who wills something. That is, I have a desire, I want to do this by the will within me because I have this choice to do it, whatever it is I might choose to do. Now, willing nothing has a clear connection to Jesus. And Jesus plays a central role in her path of annihilation. He is the exemplar of willing nothing. His obedience to the Father's will, his absolute surrender on the cross, is our model for annihilation. So it's the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus in the garden. Not what I will, but what you will. It's a complete surrender. And then it's complemented or maybe fulfilled, you could say, on the cross when he says, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Indeed, Porete knows annihilation is possible only because of the incarnation. So yes, Jesus on the cross, but also God choosing to become nothing in becoming one of us. So Jesus is the model for willing nothing in his annihilating surrender to the Father. So following Jesus means following him in his annihilation. And when we do that, we realize the transcendent consequence of willing nothing is transformation into the divine nothing. When we choose to follow this path of willing nothing, oddly enough, we choose to do that, we will to do that. When our will disappears, we're changed, we're divinized. I mean, this is the real heritage of the church, not that we just go to heaven, not that we just become holy. We are divinized. We share in the life, the very life of God. We become God. That's the word theosis. We become the divine nothing. All right, here's where I'm asking for readings, because Porete outlines 7 stages to the path of the annihilated soul. Okay, so we have someone read, and I'll switch off. I'll ask you to do a reading, and then I'll do a reading. All right. Would I have a volunteer to read this slide for us?
Chapter 118 of the Mirror of Simple Souls. Of the 7 stages of the pious soul, which are elsewhere called states, soul, I have promised, say this soul, ever since love has overpowered me, to say something about the 7 stages we call states, for so they are. And these are the degrees by which one ascends from the valley to the height of the mountain, which is so isolated that one sees nothing save God. Each degree of being has its own level. The first state or degree is that the soul who is touched by God through grace and stripped of her power of sin intends to keep for the rest of her life, that is until death, the commandments of God, which he commands in the law. And thus the soul regards and considers through great fear that God had commanded her to love him with all her heart, and also her neighbor as herself. So it seems to this soul to be labor enough for her to do all that she knows how to do. And it seems to her that even if she lived 1,000 years, her power would be fully occupied with maintaining and keeping the commandments. Unencumbered soul. At such a point and in such a state, I found myself once upon a time, says the unencumbered soul, and I was this. Now, no one should be afraid to come higher, and one will not be afraid if he has a gentle heart and is full of noble courage within. But a petty heart dares not to undertake a great thing or to climb high because of a lack of love. Such folk are so cowardly. But it is not surprising because they remain in sloth, which does not allow them to seek God, whom they will never find if they do not diligently seek him.
Thank you. The second stage or degree is the soul considers that God counsels his special lovers to go beyond what he commands. That one is not a lover who can refrain from accomplishing all that he knows pleases his beloved. But the creature abandons self and strains self above all to do the counsels of men, in the work of mortification of nature, in despising riches, delights, and honors, in order to accomplish the perfection of the evangelical counsel of which Jesus Christ is the exemplar. Thus the soul fears neither the loss of possessions, nor people's words, nor the feebleness of the body, for her beloved does not fear them, and so neither can the soul who is overtaken by him. The third stage is when the soul considers herself in the affection of the love of the work of perfection, by which her spirit is sharpened through a boiling desire of love in multiplying her in herself such works. This is done by the subtlety of understanding of the intellect of her love, which does not know how to offer consolation to her beloved except in what he loves. For a gift is not prized in love other than to give to a lover the thing most loved. So it is that the will of this creature loves only the works of goodness, through the rigor of great enterprises of all labors, by which she can nourish her spirit. So it seems to her rightly to realize that she does not love anything except these works of goodness. And for this reason, she does not know what to give love if she does not sacrifice this. For no death will be martyrdom to her except abstaining from the work she loves, which is the delight of her pleasure and the life of her will, which is nourished by this. And thus she relinquishes such works from which she has such delight. And she puts the will to death, which had life from this. In order to accomplish this martyrdom, she obliges herself to obey another will, in abstaining from work and from will, in fulfilling another will, in order to destroy her own will. And this is more difficult, much more difficult than the other two stages were. For it is more difficult to conquer the works of the will of the spirit than it is to conquer the will of the body, or to accomplish the will of the spirit. Thus, it is necessary to be pulverized in breaking and bruising the self in order to enlarge the place where love would want to be, and to encumber the self by several stages in order to unencumber the self to attain one's being. Might I have another volunteer?
The fourth stage is that the soul is drawn by the height of love into the delight of thought through meditation. And she relinquishes all exterior labors and obedience to another through the height of contemplation. Then the soul is so impenetrable, noble, and delicate that she cannot suffer any kind of touch except the touch of the pure delight of love, by which she is singularly joyful and charmed. This love makes her proud of the abundance of love by which she is mistress of resplendence, that is, of the brightness of her soul, which makes her marvelously filled with love by great faith through the concord of union which places her in possession of its delights. So the soul believes that there is no higher life than to have this over which she has lordship. For love has so grandly satisfied her with delights that she does not believe that God has a greater gift to give to this soul here below, which is such love as love has poured out within her through love. Ah, it is not strange if such a soul is overtaken, for gracious love makes her completely inebriated, and so inebriated that it allows no perception except what she has through the power by which love delights her. And thus the soul cannot value another state, for the great brightness of love has so totally dazzled her sight that she sees nothing beyond her love. And there she is deceived, for there are two other stages here below which God gives that are greater and more noble than this. But love has deceived many souls by the sweetness of the pleasure of her love, which overtakes the soul as soon as she comes near to it. Against such power none can prevail. This is known by the soul whom love has carried higher beyond herself through fine love.
Thank you. The fifth stage is that the soul considers that God is who is, from whom all things are. And she is not if she is not of him, from whom all things are. These two considerations give her a marvelous amazement, and she sees that he is total goodness, who has placed free will in her who is not, except in total wretchedness. Now, the divine goodness has placed free will within her by pure divine goodness. Thus, enclosed within the one who is not, except in wretchedness, who is therefore total wretchedness, is free will from the being of God who is being, who wills that the one who has no being might have being, according to such a gift from himself. And thus the divine goodness pours out from his bosom one rapturous overflow of the movement of divine light. Such movement of divine light, which is poured into the soul by light, shows to the will of the soul the rightness of what is and the understanding of what is not, in order to move the will of the soul from the place where it is now, where it ought not to be, in order to dissolve it where it is not, whence it comes, where it ought to remain. Now, the will sees by the light from the overflow of divine light, which light gives itself to such a will in order to dissolve this will into God, not being able to place itself there without such light. The will sees that it cannot profit if it does not depart from its own will. For its nature is evil on the account of the tendency of nothingness, towards which nature is inclined. And the will has placed her, the soul, in less than nothing. Now the soul sees this inclination and the loss of the nothingness of her nature and of her own will, and so she sees by light that the will must will the divine will alone, without any other will. And that for this purpose this will was given. And thus the soul removes herself from this will, and the will is separated from the soul and dissolves itself. And the will gives and renders itself to God, whence it was first taken, without retaining anything of its own, in order to fulfill the perfect divine will, which cannot be fulfilled in the soul without such a gift, so that the soul might not have warfare or deficiency. Such a gift accomplishes this perfection in her and so transforms her into the nature of love, who delights her with full peace and satisfies her with divine food. Thus, she is no longer concerned with the war of nature, for her will is nakedly put in the place from where it was taken, and where by right it ought to be. And this soul always had a warfare, as long as she retained the will within her, outside of her being. Okay, one last volunteer.
Now such a soul is nothing, for she sees her nothingness by means of the abundance of divine understanding, which makes her nothing and places her in nothingness. And so she is all things, for she sees by means the depth of the understanding of her own wretchedness, which is so deep and so great that she finds there neither beginning nor middle nor end, only a bottomless abyss. There she finds herself without finding and without bottom. One does not find oneself who cannot attain this. And the more one sees oneself in such understanding of wretchedness, the more one understands through truth that one cannot understand the wretchedness, not the least bit, by which this soul is in the abyss of wretchedness and in the chasm of such a resting place and of such defense. Such is the flood of sin which contains within it all perdition. This soul sees herself as such, without seeing, and who makes her see herself? The depth of humility which seats her on the throne, who reigns without pride. Their pride can no longer force entry, since the soul sees herself, and so does not see herself. And this not seeing makes her see herself see perfectly. Now this soul is at rest in the bottomless depths, and the depths are the lowest. And this depth makes the soul see very clearly the true Son of the highest goodness, for she has nothing which would impede the vision. The divine goodness shows himself to her through the goodness which draws her, transforms her, and through a joining of goodness unites her into pure divine goodness, where goodness is the mistress. The understanding of these two natures of which we have spoken, the divine goodness and the soul's wretchedness, is the ability which this has endowed her with such goodness. Thus she wills only one thing, the spouse of her youth, who is only one. Mercy shaped with justice makes peace, which has transformed such a soul into his goodness. Now she is all, and so she is nothing, for her beloved makes her one.
Thank you. Now this soul has fallen from love into nothingness, and without such nothingness, she cannot be all. The fall is so deep, she is so rightly fallen, that the soul cannot lift herself from such an abyss. And also she ought not to do it, but instead she ought always to remain there. And there the soul loses pride and youth, for the spirit has become old, which leaves her being neither enjoying nor charmed any longer, for her will has departed, which used to make her, through the feeling of love, hard, hard and prideful and impenetrable in the height of contemplation in the fourth stage. But the fifth stage has set her right, something which has shown the soul to herself. Now she sees herself and understands the divine goodness, an understanding of divine goodness which makes her see herself again. And these two glimpses take away her will and desire and works of goodness. Thus she is completely in repose and placed in possession of free being, which gives her rest through excellent nobility of all things. The sixth stage is that the soul does not see herself on account of such an abyss of humility which she has within her. Nor does she see God on account of the highest goodness which he has, but God sees himself in her by his divine majesty, who clarifies the soul within himself, so that she sees only that there is nothing except God himself who is, from whom all things are, and he who is God himself. And thus she does not see according to herself, for whoever sees the one who is does not see except God himself, who sees himself in this same soul by his divine majesty. And so the soul is at the sixth stage, free and pure and clarified from all things, but not at all glorified. For the glorification is at the seventh stage, which we will have in glory, of which none know how to speak. But the soul, thus pure and clarified, sees neither God nor herself, but God sees himself of himself in her, for her, without her. God shows to her that there is nothing except him, and thus the soul understands nothing except him, for there is nothing except him. Whatever is exists by his goodness, and God loves his goodness, whatever part he has given through goodness. And his goodness given is God himself. And God cannot separate himself from his goodness so that it would not remain in him. Therefore, he is what goodness is, and goodness is what God is. And thus goodness sees itself by his goodness through divine light at the sixth stage, by which the soul is clarified. And so nothing is except he who sees himself in such being by his divine majesty, through the transformation of love by the goodness poured out and placed in her. And thus also, he sees himself of himself in such a creature, without appropriating anything from the creature. All is properly his own and his own proper self. This is the sixth stage, which we have promised to say to the hearers by the enterprise of love. Love of herself through her high nobility has paid the debt. The seventh stage, love keeps within herself in order to give it to us in eternal glory, of which we will have no understanding until our soul has left our body. All right. That was a mouthful. Now, I did not share this with you so that you could understand everything that she wrote. I do not understand everything she wrote. I wanted you to just get a good example of what she has to say. You can go and read her book if you want. I recommend it if you have the desire, but I don't think it's necessary. I think I'm going to pare down the only things you really need to know here. She's one of many mystics whom I would argue needed an editor, someone who could come in and say, can you find another way to say this? But oddly enough, in this section, chapter 118 of the Mirror, she repeats herself a lot. And you can see she's getting at similar ideas from in a lot of different ways, and often kind of repeating the same idea in a slight variation, just to get you some taste of what she's trying to talk about. So let's break these seven stages open, all right? Make them a little bit more comprehensible. So this consequence of willing nothing like Jesus unfolds according to Porete along seven stages, okay? Which culminate in the fall into the nothingness of God. The mirror tracks the soul as it gradually becomes more naked to the annihilating intensity of divine goodness. So let's just stop right there for a second. God is clearly goodness for Porete. Love is goodness. And that's good for us, because God is not just this terror of annihilation, but goodness, and wants to share our goodness to such an extent that we need to strip ourselves of ourselves to fully experience this goodness. So she summarizes this process in seven stages by which the soul becomes nothing. So here are the 7 stages. First stage is death to sin by keeping the love commandment, putting God above all else and enlarging compassion. So she could have just said that, yeah, but she's writing in the Middle Ages, okay? The first step is just love God and love others. It's the greatest commandment. That's it. But lest you think that's easy, right? I want to remind you that a lot of these mystics, that especially these Beguines, they talk about desire. And desire here is really the fuel that ignites the spiritual journey, the mystical journey. And it seems to me that our fuel can get used up pretty quickly. I often think of a line from Richard Rohr. I don't know if it's in one of his books, but it's in one of his audiovisual presentations. He says, addictions use up desire. And I think that's helpful, because in this first level, this first stage, he's talking about death to sin, right? Very typical medieval idea, right? And still typical in many Christian churches. Maybe we could understand that as putting aside our addictions, which use up the desire that would be channeled into the search for God. That's maybe one way to put it. And that's essential to choosing to love God and choosing to love others, right? And enlarging compassion, I mean, even as you're walking down the street, you think good thoughts. You send out a prayer to everybody you meet. You know, we don't, maybe to say it the other way, we don't harbor negative thoughts about others. And that's hard, right? So loving others is not just doing something good, like holding a door open or giving a poor person some money, or no, it's intending the good of all that you meet, and not harboring even negative thoughts about the other. So level 2 is death to nature by imitating Christ. That is, following the evangelical counsels, which are poverty, chastity, and obedience. Now, that just means going deeper. I'm going to love God and love others by letting go of my pleasures and my fears, letting go of my need for pleasure and letting go of my fear, really, of the things that cause fear in me, right? So this is a deeper letting go. The first one is a letting go of my addictions. The second one is I'm going to let go of those things that may not be addictions, but that generate fear and pleasure in me. 3 is a death to all desire, a desire even for God and for the good works that the ego still loves to do, right? Because I'll be honest with you guys, I like teaching. It gives me an ego boost. Maybe you like, there are things that you're good at that you like doing. That's natural. Porete is saying even that has to go. That's why all the mystics talk about how prayer gets boring, dull, dry as dust. You get no satisfaction from it. Then you're really loving, because otherwise it's just ego, right? So what does Porete say here? But understand it well. It is herself that she loves, without her knowing, without her perceiving it. See, that's the real problem. So Porete, again, she locates the kind of the bedrock of self in the will. And if I'm choosing to teach, it's because I really like it. And you know what? I'm loving myself in doing it. Or if I'm choosing to drive, maybe I love my cars. Of course, it's ultimately for Porete, and maybe this sounds harsh, but for her, it's a selfish exercise ultimately. So that has to go. That desire even for doing what I enjoy doing. The soul is drawn in stage 4 into the touch of the pure delight of love. That is, the feeling of divine union. We grow attached to this sweetness So we have to let go even of these spiritual experiences. So you can see what's going on here. It's a gradual letting go of everything. That's willing nothing, knowing nothing, having nothing. Letting go of putting myself first in sort of obvious ways, letting go of my pleasures and my fears, letting go of ego, basically ego desires found in doing good works for God, and then letting go even of the sweetness of spiritual experience, of what delights me in prayer and worship and attending LJ's classes or whatever it is you do. Which you must. You must, of course, attend these. This is necessary for salvation. So, stage 5, she describes the beginnings of true annihilation. So here's where you get some playing with identity. Okay, annihilation has to do with who am I? That's the real question here. Am I me? Am I me and God? Am I God? God's overflowing into the soul causes death to the spirit and a start of willing nothing. Yet there's still a lingering I. Okay, so you can kind of liken this to other mystics talk about how you pray long enough, you pray through the dryness and the darkness, you get to union. Well, even in union, oh, this is wonderful. Okay, that feeling of wonder has to be not sought for itself. You're still seeking God. You keep praying, and what happens is you start to will nothing and know nothing and have nothing. God is taking you over to such an extent that you're being stripped of you, right? And this is the beginnings of it. Here in stage 6, the divine perspective predominates. So in stage 5, just to go back to it for a second, you heard her say that the soul sees herself and her own wretchedness, and how she cannot be apart from God. So stage 5 is, in other words, and you heard her use this word, it's a stage of humility. And yes, it's medieval way of putting it, our wretchedness. But stage 5 is, I see that I could not be, I can't exist without God, and anything that is mine is really just my mistakes. That's my history of mistakes. Now, again, God is still this divine goodness, and where maybe she could use a little, maybe, encouragement is to say that God loves our mistakes to a degree, or loves us in our mistakes. But anyway, stage 5 is that kind of real overwhelming self-knowledge. I am not, because I'm not God. And that is what part starts to shift our perspective away from self to God. Okay, so it's kind of how Thomas Keating talks about it. He talks about this in one of his books as a shift from self as the fixed point of reference in me to God becomes the fixed point of reference. That's what happens in stage 6. Self is no longer the center of consciousness, the fixed point of reference. There's no more dualistic mind, right? 5 is maybe the last vestige of subject sees object, duality. In stage 6, that is imploded. That's from within. There's just nothingness. God, seeing God in the space that is you. God sees God in Marguerite, for Marguerite, without Marguerite, further drawing her into annihilation. She still was a body with a brain, right? She was still a person in real life, right? This isn't about you becoming a literal, physical nobody or being snapped out of existence. It's a radical restructuring and maybe even destructuring of consciousness. And 7 is heaven, the glory of heaven, okay? Let's drill down a little bit into 5, 6, and 7. Because, it's generating the desire for God, prayer, praying through darkness, praying through even sweetness and prayer. That's a lot of what stages 1 through 4 are, right? Well, the 5th stage, and this is all from Wendy Farley, she writes, beginning with the ardor of love, the soul has become disenchanted with the world's pleasures and has pacified her fears. She endured the scathing asceticism of the will and renounced pleasure in spiritual practice. practices. This is all basically another way of saying, I'm not looking to do something because I love it. I'm looking to do it for God. In everything, in everything. This is the theme of love here. I'm just doing it for love. Even though stages 1 through 4, I'm still doing it because I love me. At the same time, I'm intending love of God in everything I do. Wills in the 5th stage. Now this is the paradox. I have to will the annihilation of my will. Will wills its own annihilation, and desire desires its own nothingness. This is the purity of non-duality, where the sweet abyssed one falls into the divine emptiness. The soul is the sweet abyssed one, with a depth that knows no bottom, because the soul is made for the nothingness of God, right? For the infinity of God that has no bottom as well. This paradoxical desire to be annihilated in God refines the soul's subtlest impediments, so divine goodness becomes all in all. It, in a lot of ways, and to make this so absolutely simple, it's all a prayer journey, and you just stop looking at yourself. That's the whole of it. Stop looking at yourself here, stop looking at yourself there. You don't, by the way, we're going through these 7 stages just so you get an idea. Do not ask where you are. Just pray. Do not ask where you are, just seek God. Now, prayer not just in church and at home, but be prayer as you are helping the homeless, or doing a ministry, or being of service somehow, or just being around your family, right? So it's not just prayer in specific, sitting times or in pews in church, or just going to church. No, this is being out in the world and being love. But that requires that you are still praying, still open to God. The soul learns it is nothing at all without God, right? That's the 5th stage. And that God is the center of all. This is union. But, and here's Farley's line here, it is reflexive awareness of union, where the mind experiences union and also is aware of the union. So this is where it's like, oh, I can still look at my union with God as an object, right? I can say, oh, that was nice. So reflexive awareness is like photography. You take you're right, it's really cold outside, so maybe let's think of someplace really warm, right? Tahiti or Hawaii, anywhere. My dad and brother live in South Carolina, so I'll think of Charleston, South Carolina, right? The palm trees and the nice beaches. And I'm on the beach with them and my kids, and we're having a great time. And you know what? I want to remember this, and I capture a picture. I use my all-pervasive phone, right? And I capture a picture. A moment in time. A picture is a possession of a moment in time that is just moving, right? That's sort of what the mind does. We try and capture something that's not capturable, right? The picture is dead. I mean, I'm sorry, but your pictures are all dead. They're nice, right? They're good to remember and see what it was like when we were back on that beach in Charleston, or any of your other experiences, but that moment is dead and gone. Sorry to be so direct. And just so God, you can't pin God down, much less pin anybody else down, right? So the mind is always trying to turn reality into an object it can grasp. And that's what's going on here at the 5th stage. Look, I'm one with God. Who's saying that thought? The self. The self can't help but make it, about the self, right? So it's good. We're still united with God. We're still trying to do God's will, but we are still at the center. The self is still the fixed point of reference. So stage 6 is where things start to get different, but it begins at the end of stage 5. This is where the soul begins to realize its divine nothingness, falling from love into its experience of the loving nothing. That's the 6th stage. Reflexive consciousness, self-consciousness disappears. Thomas Keating talks about it as self-reflection. That's the last thought to go. The soul no longer sees herself nor God, but God sees himself in her. So me not seeing myself and not seeing God, meaning God is no longer an object. In a sense, God becomes the subject, me. God starts looking out from my eyes. I don't become God, you could say, but maybe you could say God becomes me. It's not about my ego now becomes divine. It can do whatever it wants. No, that's not it at all. The ego's gone. In fact, even more than the ego, self-consciousness is gone. Now God is the center of my consciousness. There's nothing to will and no self to desire anything. The soul is in repose and freedom, completely at peace. And then the seventh stage, well, Farley says, the mind cannot stay in a state of non-duality. It vacillates in its ability to participate in each of these stages as the mind becomes more familiar with the abyss-like goodness of God. The throne of peace becomes more stable. But however stable this awareness becomes, it remains structured by an embodied mode of consciousness. In the sixth stage, the mind is free and pure and clarified, but not glorified. The seventh stage remains within love, unavailable to understanding until the soul has left our body. Only upon death will the journey be completed. So those are the 7 stages. Let's take a little bit of a closer look though here. Virtues, she writes, I take my leave of you forever. I will possess a heart most free and gay. You know that I was to you totally abandoned. I placed my heart completely in you, you know well. Thus I lived a while in great distress. I suffered in many grave torments, my pains and many pains endured. Miracle it is that I have somehow escaped alive. This being so, I no longer care. I am parted from you, for which I thank God on high. Good for me this day. Virtues, I take leave of you forever. She says, this is one of the reasons the church didn't care for this. She says goodbye to the virtues. This is all from Peter Klein, a great religious writer. For Porete, the annihilated soul, abandoned into God, abides in a position, or rather a non-position, that takes leave of the virtues. Porete says farewell to ecclesial virtues insofar as they are positive, determinate pathways to identity and recognition. The nothingness of her liquid joy is better to her than who she could become if she submitted to ecclesial authority and regimen, an authority and regimen that ended up putting her to death for refusing to recant her farewell. Ecclesial virtues, I'm going to build a self by becoming more peaceful, more loving, more joyful. I'm going to do it. That's not the program of annihilation. The virtues for Porete structure human existence toward the formation of a determinate self. It's building up an ego. That's what the virtues are about, really. A formation that for her was full of distress, torment, and pain. The virtues concern the self's acquisition and possession of its own goodness. I'm going to be good. I'm going to be virtuous. For Porete, however, goodness possessed, goodness achieved by virtue of some why, some need to become something and someone, is no goodness at all. The only goodness Porete is interested in is the goodness that arrives without myself, which is goodness that gives itself without a why. Porete desires only to abide in this beginning ex nihilo, in the instant of this love, a love that loves nothings and nobodies. She wants to be loved as absolutely nothing, for no reason at all. Through her abandonment of capability and virtue, annihilation returns her to the state of nothingness in which her self is without itself. A heart that has thrown itself into the sheer joy of being nothing. This is a heart alive only on the utter gratuity of its birth out of nothing, alive only on the grace of the instant. And so Porete takes leave of the virtues because the virtues are not content with letting the self be loved as nothing and nobody. The virtues cannot abide annihilation. They are anxious to get beyond being nothing, to produce a self that will be loved as something, as someone. One abandons care. You heard Porete say, I no longer care. To be someone, to be somebody. That's the program of the world, we could say. She's taking the program of the gospel. Unity is loving annihilation. The 6th stage in particular shows her understanding of unity. In the 6th stage, the soul no longer sees herself or God. God sees God in her, so that she sees none is but God. At this point, the terms of the dialectic disappear into a nothingness that has become all, and all that has become nothingness. God is all and God is nothing. It's all God and nothing is God. Or it's all God who is nothing, you could say. The soul is dissolved by annihilation, melted into the divine by love. It is the soul losing her own nature as a created something by the gift of God, to return to the divine abyss where there's no difference between God and soul. Annihilation is the state of nothingness in God, brought to nothing in God. Her goal is an I without a me. Her whole book is meant to help the soul become nothing in the will, the mind, and its status as a distinct being. The soul who is annihilated neither wills nor not wills anything which might be named here. The meaning of love is willing nothing, knowing nothing, having no place for God. Everything disappears into this primordial oneness with God. When we practice nothingness, we're loving. We're one with love. Peter Klein writes, one is nothing and one has nothing, and yet one is loved absolutely as nothing. For Porete, this is pure joy, better than any determinate recognition, better than any quest for identity and achievement. As nothing, the soul is freed to love itself absolutely without a why. Such an annihilated soul, says Love, swims in the sea of joy, in the sea of delights, flowing and running out of the divinity. And so she feels no joy, for she is joy itself. She swims and flows in joy without feeling any joy, for she dwells in joy and joy dwells in her. She is joy itself, by virtue of the joy which transforms her into joy itself. The annihilated soul feels no joy, for she is joy itself. I think Peter Klein took writing lessons from Marguerite Porete. Yeah, he's right. It's hard to say. It's hard to say. You are not sort of caught up in the emotion of joy. You just are joy because you're the all that is God, that is nothing. The annihilated soul falls from love into nothingness. The soul no longer sees self or God. God sees God in her. She sees there is nothing but God. In fact, the soul transcends God as an object, which opposes the subject that is the soul. When it is no longer possible to have God by way of ownership, possession, or place, then one has entered into the deepest poverty of spirit. The deeply experiential nothingness of love does not cling to names, modes, or attributes of a rational theology. This is why the church didn't like this. An image of God gives power. It sanctifies a certain order. God is a king. God blesses kings. God is a priest. God wants priests, right? Here, God is not any of those things. One loses God in the way to God to be brought to nothing in God. Love is falling into nothing, into the nothing. So what does this mean in practice? This is where we'll close out just a few more. From the mirror. Thought is no longer of worth to me, nor work, nor speech. Love draws me so high. Thought is no longer of worth to me with her divine gaze, that I have no intent. Thought is no longer of worth to me, nor work, nor speech. So very mystical, right? She also says this, the soul dwells in pure nothingness without thought. So putting all this together, what does it mean to live this path of annihilation? Soul disappears in the nothingness that is all. It is the state of apophatic contemplation. More specifically, the soul dwells in pure nothingness without thought. This is a state beyond the mind, beyond its operations. To dwell in nothingness is to stop thinking and enjoy God. The annihilated soul sings, thought is no longer of worth to me. Willing nothing, along with knowing and having nothing, frees the soul of any encumbrance. The soul becomes more and more free as it comes to know nothing and to will nothing, not even to will to do the will of God. Indeed, apophatic contemplation for Porete transcends not only the mind, but also the very distinction between God and soul. Speaking of the annihilated soul, she writes, such a soul is so transparent and understanding that she sees herself to be nothing in God and God nothing in her. Like Meister Eckhart, she sees nothingness as what God and the soul have in common. Such nothingness disrupts every attempt to grasp God by means of rationalized ontologies, as much as aiming to reduce the soul to the bliss and love of divine nothingness. Bernard McGinn may be the preeminent American scholar on Christian mysticism. He attests to the role of nothingness, the end of apophatic contemplation in Porete. He writes, apophatic language, as Michael Sells, another scholar, has shown, strives not to create systems or express ontologies, but rather to break down systems, to subvert ontologies that threaten to make God another reality. Like all apophatic mystics, Marguerite insists that there is no coming to terms with God, but only the constant effort, the performance of the process of negating the works of intellect and will in order to attain the annihilation in which God and the soul become absolutely one once more. Therefore, nothingness, nihil, is central to Marguerite Porete. Her mystical thought may be said to be founded on two apophatic pillars. God is totally incomprehensible, therefore nothing from the perspective of human categories. Two, the soul must become nothing by willing nothing in order to attain the God who is nothing and therefore all. Gotta love all these plays on words, right, guys? Porete gives expression to a fascinating and deep epistemological knowing, as well as ontological being, negation. Throughout the mirror, she pushes the soul beyond knowing by presenting the path to God as knowing nothing. She pushes the soul further by willing nothing. She pushes further beyond being into the nothing, transcending God. McGinn's acknowledgement of nothingness as central to Porete points to her project as being one of apophatic contemplation. There is a subversion of categories of being as well as the categories of virtue in her version of annihilation, ontological negation. Further, this subversion of being a virtue ties in with the encounter with the nothingness of God. The understanding of my nothingness says the soul has given me the all. And the nothingness of this all, says the soul, has taken me from prayer, and I pray nothing. The nothingness of the all refers to God. I pray nothing. Silent meditation. This is leading in a very kind of maybe ordinary direction for all this kind of possibly confusing, at least paradoxical language. It's all leading into the nothingness of silence, of silent prayer. The soul, enjoying this gift of this divine nothing, prays nothing. There's no more spoken prayer or prayer made of thoughts and feelings. In truth, the spiritual practice she describes is not a practice anymore. The soul loses all practices to enjoy in simplicity and unity the divine nothing. You who have lost all your practices, she writes, through this loss have the practice of doing nothing. This practice and this loss is accomplished in the nothingness of your lover. Porete's annihilation leaves the soul bereft of all so that it realizes the nothing who is the soul's infinite love. That's apophatic contemplation for Marguerite Porete, which you do by the Christian meditation taught by John Maine, centering prayer taught by Thomas Keating, or any other way. Lectio Divina, the Jesus prayer, all those are entries into this silence that she's talking about, which she gives the word willing nothing, knowing nothing. She writes, she is without existence, dissolved by annihilation into that first being where love has received her. When the soul is melted into the simple divinity, without feeling above the mind, abyssed in humility and poverty, now such a soul is nothing. She was incinerated on June 1st, 1310, making her the first person executed for mystical heresy in the Latin West. The very purpose of her book is to negate structure. Indeed, the very structures of the mind that maintain a self, but that also lie at the heart of the institutional church. So the church was scared of this book. The annihilated soul lives beyond any need for the structures of the church. Her books seem to suggest you don't need the structures of the church. You don't need the priests. Threaten church authority. Her mysticism inherently challenges ecclesiastical authority, insofar as popes and bishops are not annihilated. Maybe if they were annihilated, first of all, they may not want to be pope or bishop. And so there you go. There's the institution crumbles, but the gospel is lived. She refocuses the church on what matters, walking the path of annihilation rather than serving. And let's be honest, I mean, I'll speak for the Catholic Church. Maybe you guys can speak for the Episcopal Church. Churches tend to not walk the path of annihilation, but the path of ritualism, legalism, moralism, and many churches unfortunately fall into fanaticism. She refocuses us. Walk this one path. So love is the way to complete dissolution of the self. Willing nothing means desiring God alone, not the attachments that cause division. She would rather have us delight in the nothing within us. No willfulness, only willingness, only surrender. No effort, just stop trying to achieve something. That's willing nothing. It's freely rejoicing in who we are, content with nothing. We don't long for nothingness like another object, like we might long for something in the world. When we long for anything, including God, we enhance distinction. We create more self. Wanting nothing is about letting the distinction of a separate will vanish. Religious works can be egocentric. Even when I want to do God's will, I can cling to the self. Just by my willing, I maintain the separation. So willing nothing means the soul does not desire anything, but is content with God. The simple, poor, annihilated person wants the nothing. Knowing nothing is easier. It means letting go of thinking, even the awareness of God. And that disappearance of self-reflection will happen. And having nothing means no self-consciousness, no other, no being. Releasing the mind. That happens more as a gift of God rather than something we accomplish. So those are the three aspects, right, of annihilation: willing, knowing, and having nothing. And it's what the soul practices as it moves through those 7 stages. But willing nothingness is the main practice. So here's our closing. I invite you to take a deep breath and listen. The nothing that gives her everything is neither known nor loved nor praised, except only in this, that one cannot know nor love nor praise him. So take a moment of nothingness, a moment of silence, to sink into God's love. Take a big deep breath. Amen. Okay. Oh, actually, here are your questions. Okay. Why don't you take just a minute? We only got about 15 minutes here, so maybe take a minute, 2 minutes. How are you walking the path of annihilation? How would you describe love in light of what Marguerite Porete says, or God's love for us? What strikes you about this mysticism? What questions do you have? So let's just stir the pot. Something you might want to comment on or ask as we go into our time for sharing. Okay, so just take another minute. Okay, we already got some good people willing to share. So let's go ahead. Chris, please.
Yeah, sort of a question and a more of a comment, I suppose. I was thinking in terms of, okay, yeah, thanks, Marguerite Porete, but what about annihilation for the rest of us? I know we don't know much about her actual life, but I wonder if we can believe that she actually was able to live somewhere along this path. It just seems so extreme to me. And for many years I've been learning to sort of look for the ego at work and look for the self and all of its games and tricks that it plays and how I engage with the world, and learn to become closer to God as a result of seeing how the self plays, asking for help, essentially. But, and I know, LJ, you said we probably shouldn't be looking to place ourselves somewhere on this path. Where are we? How am I doing? But my gosh, in the deepest meditation for me, there might be a moment or maybe a half minute of dissolving in God and just not being present as an ego, as an I, directing things and putting words on things and doing all the things that ego and I and reason and emotion do. So, can we see that perhaps our Marguerite and the other Beguine mystics and all our Christian mystics, they give us these amazing systems as we climb towards God, were they able to live these? Is it an idea or is it real? Where did Marguerite sit on these 7 steps to annihilation of self?
Well, of course, where she was ultimately, I have no idea. But,
Right.
um, I would presume she was 5 or 6. I mean, 7. She's in 7 now, but I would presume 5 or 6. But there's something about every schema that I think you should keep in mind. And this is something I've learned by experience as much as by reading. They may not be permanently fixed, at least for a time. Because it sounds like, all right, you move from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage, and it's like the what are the government levels called? GS, right? GS1. Once you're a GS 16, there's no go back to 15, I would presume, unless maybe can you be demoted? I don't know, but it's like video games. I move from level 1 to level 2, right, and then I can't be level 3, or I can't get to level 4. That's we're maybe using too much human reason there. In fact, Wendy Farley, in one of the comments I put on the slides, sort of alluded to this, that it's probably you're in all 6 at different times. And you just said it, Chris. You just said it. In silent meditation, in fact, I'm quite convinced of this. In silent meditation, there's probably a moment where there's no self.
Sure.
Maybe there's several moments when there's just no self and you're there without you, Chris, being there. There's a you without a you, right? And then it comes back up, and maybe the normal meditation, you're in stage 5 or stage 4, right? And then, okay, you kind of go back to normal consciousness, right? And you're back to stage 1. So it's probably more that we vacillate. That it's at one time we're in stage 2 or stage 3 or stage 4, and maybe instead of saying stages, they're different moments. That's how I might put it today, rather than a stage. These are different moments in our relationship with God. Because there are times I feel like, okay, I'm back to square one. I need to get back into, maybe just not be so selfish. And then get into loving God and putting to death my selfishness, my sinful selfishness, you could say. So I think, yes, they're writing in a very elevated and paradoxical way because they're trying to express something that is elevated and paradoxical. But I'll tell you this: the easiest way I find and to categorize how to do this is prayer and awareness. That's it. And I mean by prayer, silent prayer, whatever silent prayer you do, and awareness. Meaning awareness of, like you were saying, Chris, awareness of the ego games, and then using that awareness to go right back into prayer. That's the simplest way I've thought to come in terms of how to do this. What's annihilation for the rest of us? It's that. And then, willing nothing happens as you're faced with situations that you don't like, that, life throws at you, and then you just have to deal with them. So it's not like you have to go out and that old-fashioned term, mortify your flesh. You may have heard that in St. John of the Cross or Teresa of Avila. We heard it here in Marguerite Porete. You mortify, which just means kill. kill your ego desires when, you know, you sit at a light for longer than you want to sit there, but you choose to sit there with patience. That is definitely mortifying your flesh, right? Or shoveling. I remember when it was snowing a few weeks ago, and I think I went out there 3 times to shovel. By the third time, I'm like, I am done with this, and I used a few expletives. So it's okay. Well, doing that, even though I feel like I just want to lie down on the couch and it's like hurting my back, doing it out of love is another way to mortify the flesh. That's willing nothing at the same time. Yeah. Beverly, go ahead.
Uh, it occurs to me
Mhm.
that God is transcendent and we live in immanence. And so what these mystics are doing is reversing the whole process of incarnation.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know why I hadn't thought of it that way before, but it helps me because words like nothingness and annihilation kind of seem violent,
Hmm.
whereas reaching beyond our incarnation toward that transcendence makes sense to me. And everything you guys have said then somehow falls into line.
Yeah. That's funny you said that, Beverly, because that's sort of the model that every mystic is working on, that we come from God, we are returning to God by the
Exactly.
same way that God created us and God became one of us. That's just the self-emptying of Jesus, right? That's the same way. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you got it. You
Yeah.
got it. Barb, please.
Barb.
What is going through my mind as I listen to her words and everything and all of this is we all try too hard. We just got to quit trying, I love her. I'm sure she's seen things and everything, but this thing of stages, quit thinking about the stages, you know? It's I mean, I reached a point in my life where I was getting skating levels and levels of other things. And I said, I am not going for any more merit badges.
Boom.
And you can really say, you can look at these levels and say, nah, I'm not going for merit badges. I'm going to leave space in my life for what God wants to do with me.
Hmm.
And rather than saying, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that, it's just, to me, it's more, you talk about awareness. And of course, I love Anthony DeMello with all of his awareness stuff, but it's my new thing, for whatever it's worth, is openness. Just being. And at this point in my life, for so many years, I've been doing. What do I have to do next? What do I have to do next? Where do I have to go next? And I don't have to do that anymore. I'm
Yeah.
working on getting my mindset changed from what I have to do, what I want to do, and just what am I? What am I being? And how am I being? It's to me, so that's a big thing. And although, her stages are important and I think that they instruct, but in the end, it's not about what stages you you reach, excuse me, what stages you reach, dangling preposition. So what stages you reach, but rather just being with it and letting God and it's, think of the Holy Spirit. That's my new buddy right now. The Holy Spirit has this creative impetus and energy.
Hmm.
And I just want to let myself be molded by it. Just let go. And so I see all of this letting go of stuff as part of that. And you can think of your stages and, oh, I'm so good because I let go of this and that. And that's fine. But ultimately, it's only the spirit working on you. We don't reach anything. Only the spirit does something in us, and just being open to what the spirit is going to do in us. And that's hard. I'm looking at the people here, and I bet you all had careers, you all had things you strove for, you tried to do. And I'm looking at Lisa going through the Shalem program. We had to write our papers and do things, and it just there comes a point where you just have to say, no, I don't have to. I do not have to, because that's not what counts. None of those merit badges count. And I'm not even sure what counts. I'm not going to say, but I do know that I don't need to reach those steps. I don't need to reach anything. I just desire to let the spirit work in me. However the spirit decides, it's going to do that. And I suspect, because I'm, as you all know, I'm a big believer in the evolution of consciousness and everything else in the universe. What the spirit desires for me today probably won't be what the spirit desires tomorrow.
Hmm.
And it certainly probably is not exactly what the spirit desired yesterday. So, there are stages. Yeah, there's stages, but I don't want to get myself, I don't want to let myself get wrapped up in like, what stage am I in? And I need to go to this one and I'm stuck on that one. I'm into floating.
Float. Love it. Thanks, Barb. Sounds to me like you're in stage 5 at least. I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
LJ, I'm not Kamais, by the way. I'm Portia, but I don't know how to change it for my kid's name. But I just had one comment. I feel like I'm a baby in this contemplative stuff, and I'm also very much still in, I feel like, a doing stage of my life. But what one thought that struck me today was sort of like how an artist gives color or depth to something. So I was thinking about a couple scriptures came to mind about, like, for God alone, my soul waits in silence, from the Psalms. And then I think it's Acts, in him we live and move and have our being. Yeah. And I feel like Marguerite in particular it's like she's taking those words and then painting a picture of that. At least that's what I took from it. Like, instead of trying to understand it all, just sort of trying to like see a picture, I guess. So it sort of it felt like those verses got illustrated in listening to her tonight. So
that's wonderful. Yeah, it's almost like she creates a mood or an atmosphere where you kind of
right.
That's part of what mystics are trying to do. That's really perceptive, that she's trying to more than give you ideas. She's trying to give you a taste of her own experience. So you kind of are getting that just with her language. With all the kind of twists and turns of her language, that's kind of giving you a sense of, oh, this is really mysterious. Right. Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Portia. That's great.
Oh, thanks. And whoever fixed my name, thank you too.
Yeah, you got her name fixed. So one final thought. I think it's really well said, Barb. I think Marguerite Porete would say, yeah, don't worry about the stages. She probably would say, and that's to put it positively, just be. Even beyond what I just said to Chris, like prayer and awareness, just being. It's just nothing. It's just float or be open. Or you can use the word of some current spiritual teachers, presence. It's just presence in whatever you're doing, right? Just prayer. That's it. And then the annihilation will take care of itself. Well, thanks, guys. This has been a lot of fun. These Beguines were a lot of fun to share with you. I hope you can appreciate some of what they said. Reading them, okay, you could try if you want to, but go with God's blessing. All right. Great to be here. Thank you so much. And turn it back over. Lisa, Peg, anything you need to say?
Thank you, LJ.
Thank you. Thank
That's
you.
always the answer. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to say thank you to Portia too. You made me think of that image of swimming in God. It's hard for me to read this stuff, but I can swim in it.
Right.
There you-
Yes.
You got it. There
Precisely.
you go. You got it.
Nice.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Bye,
Be
all.
well.
Thank you.
Bye.